Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneider, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. Today we're here to hit another mailbag. We got a lot of questions. We're going to try to get to all of them, but it might not. We're going to try our best. So let's just roll right into it, Nick. Let's start with Zeno1121 from YouTube. He says, do you see a path where Daniel Jones is not ready for the start of the season and Drew Lock comes in and plays just fine? Daniel's time and path to playing becomes less of a chance and more of a, well, Drew Lock's playing good. How do we bench him at this point? That injury clause in his contract is a very real thing. I love the show. I want to know your thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a path for that to happen. Now, he's out there throwing the football and looking well, but there could be a setback. And if Drew Lock goes in there and plays well, I think the Giants are very highly incentivized to play Drew Lock over Daniel Jones, despite the public perception of Daniel Jones versus Drew Lock. It's that contract is what really you need to look at. And he gets hurt again, Giants are in a world of hurt.
Nick nailed it. I don't think anything they've said publicly about the quarterback situation should be taken with anything more than a grain of salt, because there's just no way you can expect the franchise to say that they're done with Daniel Jones or say that they're going to have an open competition or anything of that nature, because it undermines the confidence in the player that they have allocated, $45 million in cap space to. They want him to be QB1. He will be as long as he doesn't have a setback. But if he has this setback, like you talked about, Nick, and Drew Lock plays well, I don't think there's any doubt that he'll remain the starter, because we've seen this already with Kenny Golladay. Kenny Golladay had an injury. He was slow starting, and they played David Sills over him despite Kenny Galladay's contract. And obviously, Kenny Golladay didn't have the injury clause in his contract, which adds that added layer to the Daniel Jones situation. But I really don't think that. I think they'll play they'll let the best player win. So if Drew Lock does get his opportunity and plays well and the Giants win games, they're not going to bench him just because they said Daniel Jones was going to be the starter.
I don't know if this is C-Learns or Clerns, Dan, but whoever it is, he says, with the addition of guys like Nabers, Johnson, and Tracy, along with the extra bodies along the offensive line, do you think Brian Daboll tries to open up the offense again for DJ, or do you think they'll try and keep it simpler and keep going back to the 2022 game plan for him? Or what do you think the offensive game plan will be in general in 2024?
This is a great question. This might be what we design the headline around for this question. I'm curious to get your take on this, Nick. I'm going to give my take, and I haven't discussed this with you, so we'll see how you feel about this. I don't think they're going to go back to the 2022 game plan. I'll tell you why I don't think that. One, I feel like the talent around them has been upgraded so much from 2022 when there were guys like Richie James running routes versus now Wan'Dale Robinson and Malik Nabers out there and Jalen Hyatt out there, and hopefully, which I think, Nick, and again, it's projection, but I really, that's undeniable. There's undeniably more speed and explosion at wide receiver than they had in 2022. Now, the projection part is I think the offensive line could be better than it was in 2022. I think that because I think that these veterans they added, and hopefully the offensive line coach they added, can get them to a higher level. The 2022 offensive line was better than 2023, but it still had room to grow. Based on that, I don't think they're going to go back to the 2022 game plan. But it's not just that. I think ultimately what they did in 2022 has been figured out by defensive coordinators around the NFL. They have enough tape on it. We saw signs of it being figured out in 2022 when they went 3-7-1 down the stretch run, and defenses were figuring them out. But obviously they had good games against the Colts and Vikings that kind of gave that false hope and confidence. In 2023, early part, defenses weren't going to let it happen. You see it with Jalen Hurts as well. Defenses are scheming around the idea of let's not give the B gap open to the quarterback to just run through. Let's pass rush him in a certain way where if he wants to run as a quarterback and scramble, which he was doing a good job of, Hurts and Jones in 2022, they're going to have to do it to the outside. They're going to have to roll to the outside. And once we have them rolling to the outside, we've cut off half the field. They're going lateral. They're going laterally instead of vertically, and they're wasting space. It's not a good thing overall for any quarterback. So I don't think that's going to be available to them. I think they're going to have to not only lean into the new personnel they've added, but lean into a different game plan. And I really do think they will open the offense up for Daniel Jones, and it will be sink or swim for Jones. He's going to have to process this new version of this offense with space and verticality and speed and explosion at the receiver position in a different way than he's processed it at any point in his career with Brian Daboll. And that's it. And if he doesn't, he'll be benched. So it's on Daniel Jones. He'll have every opportunity. And I really don't see them going back to the 2022 scheme. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Nick.
I'm not 100% certain if the Giants offense is going to change that much, because I think the impetus to change is the quarterback position. Right. So the additions can certainly help enhance the play of the quarterback. But the quarterback still needs to pull the trigger when those opportunities to create the explosive plays downfield manifest themselves. And I'm a little bit unsure if that's the case. So as of right now, I'm not going to sit here and say it's the 2022 offense. You added some really talented players that offer positive traits that the Giants did not necessarily have on the 2022 football team. But the Giants offense is going to change from the standpoint that they don't have Saquon Barkley anymore. So it's not going to be maybe as run reliant. It also depends on how the defense is playing Jalen Hyatt and Malik Nabers.
Right.
It depends on a lot of different things. Primary face of any offense is the quarterback position. And if that primary face is the same and is still kind of reluctant, I'm not enthused that the Giants are going to unlock this explosive type of upside in terms of 20 plus air yards down the football field throws. I think you can still get chunk plays through the talents of Malik Nabers, Jalen Hyatt, and Wan'Dale Robinson.
So I would agree with you, Nick, from a realization standpoint. Like, I'm not saying I'm confident that the production will come and that it will be effective, but I am confident. And let me first start. I have two things I want to get to. So let me first start asking your question. Do you think it's even possible to go back to what they were running in 2022? Or do you agree with me that defenses have schemed this out and it's just not available anymore?
You could still run what you did in 2022 to some degree, though. Like, these are concepts we're talking about. They're very broad concepts. Play action, use play action bootlegs. I still think they're going to use that if Daniel Jones is healthy.
No, I want, okay. That's not what I meant. Let me be more specific about it. Specifically, the idea of if your first read isn't there, come off it fast and check the B gap and run the B gap.
I think there are some aspects of that could still manifest if the edge rusher is flying around like not collapsing on that B gap, and there are routes that are pulling the middle linebacker or the outside linebacker away from that part of the field. And yes, Daniel Jones, I think, will still be asked to do that, but it's not like their 2022 offense was just, hey, this is all you're doing. That was kind of a reaction to how the defense was playing the New York Giants based on the route combinations that were being ran behind the defensive line and how the defensive line was rushing and how Evan Neal or Andrew Thomas were blocking that edge rusher away from the B gap, giving Daniel Jones at least that option to run.
Okay, so I think there will be opportunities. I think it will be less of, I think the way that he reads the defense will be a little bit different this year. We'll see what happens on that front. As far as if he can get through that, all his progressions and look more vertically. But the way I see it, the second part, as far as like, will this actually happen or not? I think it will be a lot of sink and swim at this quarterback position. Because I agree with you that the quarterback is still the guy who determines this. But I know one thing, Drew Lock may not be a great NFL quarterback or even better than Daniel Jones, but Drew Lock will process this offense differently. And if he's not taking the shot, if you're talking what you're discussing, Nick, which is we've added all the speed and talent at wide receiver and explosiveness, and the O-line has taken enough of a jump. And Daniel Jones is still doing what he was doing in 2022 or 2023, which is all this underneath stuff, processing it slowly and locking onto those first reads. They'll move on. Like, they will bench him. They're not winning games. And they'll put in someone like Drew Lock, who may not be as fast as Jones as far as processing and getting the ball out quick, not as accurate as Jones, but he'll take those shots and he'll try to actually open up the defense with his arm. And if that's and with just getting the ball out fast and down the field. And so I just think that ultimately, like, that idea, like, the leash is so much shorter on Jones than it was at any point in his career.
And to go back to the first question, this front office is incentivized to play Drew Lock if that contract is just hovering over them, right? It's funny because they're incentivized to play Daniel Jones because he's making all the money. But that damn injury guarantee, if that's fully in effect, if he can't pass a physical, you have to take that into account. That's massive.
Right. I mean, look, like, I heard Louis Pasco, who is a listener, and thank you, Louis, for being a listener, saying, stop talking about the injury guarantee. It's nothing. They can deal with it. No, dude, like, $25 million injury guarantee is not nothing, dude. That's the best offensive lineman in free agency that they could sign to their roster and make their O-line better. Literally, the best. It could be a Joe Tooney. Joe Tooney was for under $25 million against the cap per year. That's what we're talking about here. Potentially reshaping your offensive line with an offensive line. Maybe an edge rusher, maybe a corner like L'Jarius Sneed. You can allocate that cap space to. $25 million dead cap is not nothing. That is something that can improve the team immediately.
Could you imagine how cataclysmic it would be for the New York Giants?
I mean, people are going to kill the Giants if they play Jones and he gets injured and then they have to take on that dead cap.
That's a fireable offense, though. That's
then like Joe Shane is in trouble.
Not only did you give the quarterback, and I think there's a lot of nuance to that conversation. The quarterback, like, I think there's a ton that can be discussed. I don't think it's as simple as people try to make it. But then after he's getting paid over $40 million a year, he gets injured, and that affects you in 2025 when you could have realistically got out of the contract with just 21 million in dead cap, and it freed up 19 million on the cap. Now you're on the hook for another 20. That would
At that point, he's back, Nick. At that point,
devastating.
he's back. Like, they won't even cut him because the injury guarantee. So now he's just like missing on the pup list for 2025, like potentially your QB2 or whatever, your most expensive QB2 in the NFL. But it is a possibility, and I hope it doesn't happen. I hope he can just, play good and stay healthy, and that's really what the Giants need him to do. But you can't look at it like, oh, it's 25 million. That's nothing. No, in the grand scheme of things, it is something. It's potentially the best offensive lineman in free agency, that class, or any position, corner, whatever you need. So somebody to consider. They'll obviously consider it. Nolan David McGarrah asks, why do we already have hot seat reports about Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll? Can we at least let them clean up the god-awful mess that Dave Gettleman made first? It's only year 3.
I love how this question ties perfectly into the question and what we were just talking about. It's because they gave a contract to Daniel Jones. And when you commit to a quarterback and that quarterback just falls flat on his face, I think there's a lot of reasons why that happened, but he did fall flat on his face. And there was a lot of consternation about giving him that contract to begin with, which doesn't take into account the reality of the situation, the Giants won a playoff game, all that kind of stuff. Then I think that's one of the reasons why, after just a devastating letdown of a season, a lot of Giant fans are calling for Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll's head.
Yeah, and we're going to touch on this on a larger points. I don't want to answer that. I don't want to get too deep into this one, Nolan, because we're going to do a podcast on this. But I think Nick nailed it. There's obviously other factors, because the Giants are potentially entering year 3 without a Super Bowl ceiling. And some fans do believe that if you're entering year 3, you should have a Super Bowl ceiling already. I personally will get more into this on that show, but find that a little bit too much pie in the sky to expect. Personally, I mean, how many teams in the NFL have a Super Bowl ceiling going into 2024? And if that answer is as few as I think it might be, then how could we expect a team to have it, expect every team to have it by year 3 of a new regime, especially when that regime was inheriting a salary cap mess and a ton of busted, wasted picks, including 2 first-rounders in Kadarius Toney and DeAndre Baker. So we'll get to that more, but I just want to preview that a little. So I'm usually good with names. Matt Leibowitz. I should know that. Come on. He's part of the tribe.
That's a rough one, Dan. That's a rough one, bro.
I can't miss tribe names. I can't miss tribe last names. I really can't afford to do this type of thing. Matt Leibowitz. Now it's obvious. I can't believe
you can be shipper missing Italian names all the time.
I know. You miss Italian names all at a high rate, to be honest with you. But
look at this. See how he's trying to deflect on me with those?
You know me too well. Matt Leibowitz says, assuming Daniel Jones is not the answer this season, what do you think is the potential plan to move forward at quarterback? And do you feel like we will look more towards a free agent or the trade market, or will we try to do some movement up in the draft and trade up in the draft?
I think they'd consider everything, and there's really no way to say it right now. There's really no way to have an answer, Mr. Leibowitz.
I think Nick's right. They'll consider everything: the trade route, the free agent route. That at some point becomes more appealing to me, Nick. I used to never feel this way, but there are quarterbacks, I think, if you can put in the right situation, are able to take their game to another level than they have previously shown, despite what the public and perception might be. And if the Giants have their opportunity to get one of those quarterbacks via trade or free agency next year, specifically free agency, Nick, I really love, because if you go the free agent route, you don't have to give up draft picks. All you're giving up is salary cap space. And that salary cap space is just space that you're getting back from Daniel Jones, is $50 million against the cap that you cut at that point. That becomes intriguing to me, and we'll see if there are free agents who fit that bill. But I look less toward, the past of what these players are able to do, and more toward, can Brian Daboll get them to another level? Can Malik Nabers get them to another level? Or Jalen Hyatt, Wandale Robinson, Andrew Thomas, players like that are part of this offense.
Nathan Rourke.
Yeah, Nathan Rourke. Oh, no. Nathan Rourke. All right, YouTube AI or YouTube Al, I don't know if that I is that an L or an I, says, this is a great question. What do you think about the idea of a franchise, maybe not the Giants, but any franchise, acknowledging that drafting a top 3 to 5 quarterback is a very hard thing to do? Instead of trying to draft a QB, and instead you should try to draft a QB with non-elite upside, but solid upside every 3 to 4 years, and then use the money saved consistently having a quarterback on his rookie deal to build out an elite roster elsewhere. I guess this is similar to what the 49ers are doing with Purdy, but making that the long-term strategy. Can you win a Super Bowl with a strategy of rotating a quarterback out like you guys have suggested with running backs every 3 to 4 years, and giving up on the idea of getting that true franchise quarterback? More broadly, from a 30,000-foot view, if given the choice to build a team with a top 3 quarterback. Let's get to that question next. Is a whole different question.
I think
these are both amazing questions.
YouTube Al/AI. I think this is a great question. I believe you do that until you find the guy, but you need to be shrewd with judging on if said individual is the guy. Joe Burrow, the guy. Patrick Mahomes, the guy. Justin Herbert, the guy. Where it gets a little murky is it's Dak Prescott, Jalen Hurts. That's where it gets a little bit more murky. But I think you do this strategy until you find a guy who has a difference-making trait that allows whatever roster he is on, if it's competent enough, to compete for a Super Bowl. That's where I'm at with this. What about you, Dan?
I like that answer a lot. I think here's the thing. I don't believe as strongly as other people that it's just very easy to, quote unquote, build an elite roster elsewhere. I believe that if you try to do that via the free agent route by having a lot of cap space that you are accruing back from having the rookie quarterback deal for 3 to 4 years and then recycling that every 3 to 4 years with a new rookie quarterback, you may not have the results you expect. I think mostly building elite roster comes from drafting well. And that is not, it's more easily said than done. Now, drafting well and re-signing those players, a la Andrew Thomas, Dex Lawrence, what we've seen with the Giants, those young players on the second deal, because then you're getting guys that you know for sure in the building can do their job. You're getting guys that teams that originally drafted didn't just pass on and let hit free agency for injury purposes or things that you may not know. You're getting guys you know everything about, and they know the system, and they're healthy, and you know their injury history, and you know how they're going to perform on a consistent basis. So I'll start by saying that. The second part of this, I kind of like your answer the best there, Nick, because I don't know, like rotating a quarterback every 3 to 4 years, for example. Okay, let's say we draft a quarterback who's pretty good, for example. I'm trying to think of who a good example might be of that. Like you could say Dak, but I think he's probably a level above what we would say of that. I don't know of a good example I can think of right now, Nick. Maybe like a Derek Carr type quarterback.
That's a good example.
Yeah, like a Derek Carr type quarterback. And then instead of re-signing Carr, you just revert. You just do what the YouTuber is suggesting. Al is suggesting. You just recycle. You go back to the well. Problem with that is your next rookie quarterback doesn't know the system, and you don't know for sure. Any rookie quarterback is a projection. We know that. We have no idea how they're going to make the jump to the NFL level. Now you could be taking that step backwards, and now your roster is getting older. You've built out this great roster, but now they're a year older. Now they're 2 years older because you're going back to the next draft to draft another quarterback. Now you're 2 years older, and you didn't use all those first-round picks or second-round picks on players to revive and replenish the roster. You've used them on quarterbacks, so now those guys that were so good on your roster are now a year older, and maybe an injury happens, and maybe the cap happens, and now you have to re-sign those guys, and you're losing cap space. So I think overall, pie in the sky, this could work, but it adds a layer of risk and opportunity cost to passing on those other position players when you keep drafting the quarterbacks.
And it's also removes the human element of this too. And let's be honest, there's not a lot of top-end quarterbacks in the National Football League. So a lot of teams would settle with the Derek Carr. And settle is a word that has negative connotations, but we're going to be honest too, man. Like you can win with a quarterback like that. We've seen quarterbacks win with, or we've seen teams win with, I would say, suboptimal quarterback play with a great infrastructure around him. And that could also be used to YouTube Al's point as well. But I don't know, man, because sometimes just having the right leader in place, he might not be the best quarterback, but the entire locker room respects him. It does maintain a level of continuity. You're not giving him $60-50 million a year, but you're giving him more than what a rookie would get paid. There is also merit to that argument as well. That's why I just don't think this is as simple as, oh, it's either this or it's that. Right. You have to consider the entire picture of everything to come to a conclusion of an investment in a certain quarterback. And you can judge your own conclusions on if the Giants did that adequately enough in 2023 or prior to the 2023 season.
That's a good point, Nick. And then one more point on that is, look, if you're recycling quarterbacks every 3 or 4 years, you're losing something that I personally, there's no studies to back this up, but it's just kind of eye test that I personally believe strongly in, which is quarterback to receiver core rapport. And I think rapport is a very big factor in what works in the NFL and what doesn't work in the NFL.
It's Danny Rhymes right there.
Yeah, and I did core instead of corpse. But, I think it's a big thing that works, that makes a big difference in the NFL. Why did Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase hit so fast in the NFL? Because they threw 1,000 balls together before their final season at LSU. Then they threw 1,000 more balls together at their final season the final season together at LSU. And then they go right over to the Bengals. Like, you're losing that. So it's something interesting. And I want to talk about your second question, because it's another great question, Al. You said from a 30,000 foot view, if given the choice to build up a team with a top 3 to 5 quarterback in the NFL, i.e. the Chiefs, Bills, and Bengals, or a top 3 to 5 roster, i.e. the 49ers and the 2022 Eagles, which would you go for and which is more realistic? It just seems that, at least from my perspective, if you can find an elite QB, it's a lot easier to keep re-signing one player than having to keep an entire roster elite.
I think that's a very good point. Which way would I want to go? I think I would go with the quarterback, because having an elite quarterback, to his point, is the optimal strategy. What's more realistic? Kind of think it's the roster. I think finding the elite quarterback, there have been fool's gold with elite quarterbacks in the past where they had a great rookie season, a solid second season, and then it's like, the NFL starts to catch up to them a little bit. I think the Mahomes and the Allens, they're all very rare. Yeah. Those guys just don't grow on trees. So I think it's more realistic to build a better overall roster and then bring in the subpar quarterbacks to compete rather than landing that Patrick Mahomes. Because even guys that you trade up number 1, number 2, number 3 overall, Patrick Mahomes was picked later in the draft.
Yeah.
Tom Brady was picked in the 6th round. Now that was, an obvious outlier, but I don't know. Where do you stand on this?
This second part, I'm going to answer the easy part of this question first. The first part to me is very easy. I would rather have a top 3 quarterback than a top 3 roster. I believe the quarterback is almost everything in this sport, and I've seen elite quarterbacks do a lot with a little. Joe Burrow's offensive line as a rookie, almost dead last, horrific looking. Justin Herbert's offensive line as a rookie, horrific looking. Patrick Mahomes has won Super Bowls with issues at wide receiver, horrible wide receiver talent, all offense not functioning during the regular season. He figures it out in the playoffs. He almost won a Super Bowl against the Bucs with one of the worst offensive line situations I've ever seen. Like, they had 3 injured starters just before the Super Bowl. And I recently saw a video, Nick, by the way, that showed a lot of questionable calls in that game. An interception by the Chiefs that was called back by a very questionable defensive holding call in your boy Mike Evans, who draws, and that could have changed the entire game. A field goal the Bucs had to settle for, where the special teams and the Chiefs got a weird penalty, and then it turned into a touchdown
right now. I can't believe you're doing this right now. You're doing this because you were so pissed off because you lost a lot of money on that game.
Oh, yeah, I've bet Patrick Mahomes every single Super Bowl in my life. But I'm also doing it to say that, like, Mahomes almost won a Super Bowl with, like, 3 injured offensive linemen. He makes that much of a difference. That part to me is easy. And now the second part to me is a very interesting question. I think both are insanely hard. Now, I have to decide which one is rarer. The rarity of finding the Mahomes type quarterback, or in my mind, I think it's extremely rare to build the elite roster out, because I'll tell you why. 2 big reasons. One, how many variables come into play, and now the variance is such a big factor. You have to find 12 different players that are elite, or say, not that many, but maybe 6 to 10 6 elite players, and then 6 more great starters. That's so hard to do to me. And then in addition to that, not only is it hard to do that, now you have to find a way to keep them all on your roster. You have to re-sign them to big contracts. And once you do, you have to pray they don't get injuries, because now you have all this dead cap because you have to cut a guy who was injured, and I have to replace him with another elite, or if he's not one of your elite guys, one of your good starters. I think both are incredibly difficult to find personally. So that, if I had the gun to my head, pick one of the two, I think it's probably easier to build the elite roster out, Nick. But I don't think either are easy.
But I think building the elite roster stems from stability in the organization, something the Giants have lacked for so long. Howie Roseman has been in place. Howie Roseman lost his job and kept his job at the same time somehow. He lost his role but stayed with the organization. Chip Kelly got fired, and then he assumed the role and took over the drafting. And they've been able to hit draft after draft after draft. When you're recycling through general managers and you're recycling through front office members, the draft picks that you selected, the guys coming in, they don't have the same conviction on those guys. They want to bring in their own guys. And you see this all around the NFL. And that's why patience is a virtue sometimes, because you want to select players, bring them in, and then groom those players and put them in the best environment. And you also want to do your due diligence to know that that player not only is talented, but is going to come in and do the right things that you're asking him to do as a professional. the continuity is a huge part to building the elite roster. I think you're right, Dan. You need to finding those guys is difficult, and there's going to be busts no matter what. I mean, the Eagles drafted Jalen Reagor right over Justin Jefferson. There's going to be busts no matter what. But having a stable front office to allow these players to thrive and a coaching staff with some continuity, I think can go a long way to maximizing the assets that you bring into your building.
That's a great point, Nick. And to that point, it also lends to why, and we'll discuss it again on a further podcast. And these are great questions that are leading to a lot of these types of stuff. And obviously from 30,000 foot view has longer conversation, but it leads to like, maybe there is more inherent risk. And I know you feel this way like I do, to just another cycle, fire another GM, fire another coach, bring another one in, because then everything you just discussed there, Nick, gets thrown out and restarted and recycled. And in a lot of ways, you're changing coordinators then. So now a lot of the guys you drafted don't fit the scheme. You have to all this
vision changes, man. Like, think about it from think about it from a business perspective. You have a manager, right? That manager gets fired. You bring in a new manager, and then you're like, oh man, there's new guys up my name. Must be this doesn't make it's similar, right? Because the vision that was laid in front of a franchise over the last 3 years of a previous general manager is now just being thrown away. So a lot of those assets that were selected by that team, that vision is now gone. So they might not fit into the vision of the new people that are coming in. And that's how a lot of these NFL, it sucks, man. It's a brutal business, but a lot of these players come into the league and after the first year, their general manager that selected them and freaking chose them is fired. Now that guy is sitting there like, oh shit. Like now that vision that this coaching staff and this general manager had for me is no longer here. And I got to really prove myself to these new people. And even if I do that, I still probably am not getting a second contract. And now I'm a journeyman for the rest of my life.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And that's part, like, when you come in, like a Shane and Dable, when they came in, they had this vision and this blueprint, and every little decision they've made has fit into that. And when you just restart that, it's hard to just hope and expect the best is going to come. Now, some teams have been able to do that. I want to give credit where credit is due. The Texans were able to do that. A new GM came in, and they had a vision, and they've got that going fast. A lot of that is they got CJ Stroud. I think most of that is they got CJ Stroud. Now, all these other pieces look good.
D'Amico too, man.
And D'Amico too, because he runs a great defense. That was part of it. But I do think it's just like with Dable. If he had the right piece, he could look a lot better now too. Part of that is having that quarterback. He makes a lot of the players look better around him. At least I believe that strongly. I think that Ryan Pace is going to go through a similar thing there with Chicago. But a lot of that to me is he got Caleb Williams. Like, who gets that? Like, so a lot of that is that. But great question. Longer answer. Here comes another great question. So we'll get to this one from Trevor Winstraw. He says, hopefully I'm not too late on this, but how likely do you think it is that this regime, after all is said and done, never gets a shot to work with a young, high upside quarterback? We talk about them not addressing quarterback, but in my opinion, the only real shots they had in the draft were Hooker last year, JJ and Penix this year, and maybe whatever happens next year. But if next year's class doesn't turn out to have high-end talent, which could happen, could not, we don't know, there seems to be a real chance this regime may never get a shot by essentially no fault of their own, besides not trading more key players away during the mid-2023 season.
I think this is a great question or statement, whatever we want to call it, Trevor. I do believe you are onto something. I wouldn't say it's fully through no fault. The Daniel Jones contract is something that we can't just overlook. Now, I think, again, other variables go into that. Dan and I have talked extensively about it. I'm sure we'll continue to talk extensively about it. But, yeah, I think that you might be onto something, that the Giants might not put themselves into a position under this regime to develop a quarterback, which would be a damn shame, because the primary reason you signed Brian Dable was to develop a young quarterback.
Yeah, now this goes into a larger question, which we'll discuss on another podcast when we talk about the hot seat. I think they probably have a longer leash than some fans think they should or expect. I think John Mara is looking at this a little more long-term. So maybe they might get that opportunity if they don't get it next year in 2026, the 2026 draft, but maybe not. Like, they're going to have to win games to get that. And then if they win games, do they even have an opportunity to get a quarterback in the draft? Or is it going to be like this year where they were picking at 6, which is pretty high, Nick, and they still had no opportunity in their minds to get an elite quarterback prospect? I know some people thought they should have with Penix and JJ, whatever. It is what it is. I don't agree with that personally. I don't even think I would consider Hooker that personally last year. Hendon Hooker, we liked him, but I wouldn't consider him an elite quarterback prospect by any means. So I think that's the nature of the NFL too, Nick, in a lot of ways. Like, a lot of these coaches, despite being quarterback whisperers like Dable might be, aren't going to get the opportunity. It's very hard. You need to be in the right draft class. Sergio Rodriguez asked, what teams do you predict will be looking for their next quarterback high in the draft next year? And where do you predict the Giants will be picking? We're not going to answer the second part, but how about the first part?
So let's look around the league. Who needs a quarterback? I think the Jets could definitely use a quarterback. I don't think they're going to be picking high, though. I think they're going to be a successful team. I think the Saints are an interesting one. Are the Saints going to need a quarterback? I think they're probably going to win some games. Like, who's rumored to be a shitty football team that doesn't have a quarterback? The Giants are in that conversation, right? Who else?
Let's go real quick division by division, just speed round. Dallas has a possibility because of Dak's contract. He might be a free agent. They might be in the quarterback market. Washington, no shot. They just drafted someone. Eagles, no shot. Cap space. Giants, obvious. Bears, no shot. Lions, no shot. They're about to extend Goff, and he's there.
They have Hooker too.
And they have Hooker too. Minnesota, no shot. JJ McCarthy. Who's the last team there?
Green Bay, no.
Green Bay, no shot. Okay, now we move forward. Tampa, probably no shot because, yes, they have some outs in that contract, but they did just re-sign Baker Mayfield, I think.
I wouldn't say no shot.
Okay, not no shot. Lukewarm. Unlikely. I'll say lukewarm, unlikely. Atlanta, obviously no shot. Saints have a good shot with Derek Carr there, and obviously, I don't know what they're doing. They don't have cap space, but they'll figure it out. Either way, they have a good shot. They could lose a lot of games this year. I'm going to put the Saints as a priority team that could be against the Giants. Who's the last team in that?
Carolina.
Carolina, no shot. No, I shouldn't say no shot. That's not a no shot. They could with David Tepper, they could easily move on from Bryce Young after next year. So Carolina in the mix. Carolina and New Orleans are hot teams in that mind. And Tampa maybe, but I put the two elite so far. If we're tiering it like that, is those two, and then the second tier would be the Cowboys and the Bucks. Next division, Seattle, I'll put in that elite tier of potentially needing it. I think they can move on from.
I don't know about elite, but I think maybe a step below. I think the bringing in a Sam Howell isn't insignificant.
Yeah. Okay. San Fran, no, I don't think any shot there. Rams could be in the mix, but they'll probably win too many games. So I don't think that's going to happen but you can put them in the mix. We're already putting teams like Dallas in there. So maybe that next tier. And then what's the last team in that division that I'm missing? Cardinals. Cardinals are interesting. I think Cardinals are in the mix as well. If Kyler doesn't perform well, they're very much so in the mix. Move on. You said Jets. I think hopefully Rodgers will have a good enough year that he'll go back for another year after that. So I don't worry too much. Josh Allen, no shot. Bills, no shot. Patriots, no shot. Dolphins, I don't think so. I think they're going to extend Tua before the season. So I think we'll be in good shape there.
I think you're right, but it's definitely not a no shot.
It's not a no shot. I don't want to put a no shot, but I think they will extend Tua. And if they do extend Tua, I will put it in no shot because they won't be able to get out of that contract fast. Baltimore, no shot. Cincinnati, no shot. Cleveland.
Who knows, man?
Possible.
What a crappy situation.
I don't know when they can get out of that contract, but definitely
we bitch
possible.
As Giant fans, man. We bitch as Giant fans. Imagine being a Cleveland Browns fan right now.
Well, I would say that about some teams more than Cleveland because they've built out such a good roster.
Cleveland also, dude, they haven't won anything.
Well, that
ever, dude.
From that standpoint,
and you go and you make this investment into Deshaun Watson, and you have all those allegations that it's such a crappy freaking situation, and he sucks, and he's injured, and everyone hates him. And then the team that traded him away is freaking basking in glory with CJ Stroud right now. Wow. Like that's gotta hurt, man. That's gotta hurt, and it would only happen to a team like the Cleveland Browns or the New York Jets.
They have done really good things with their roster, Cleveland, like to win the amount of games they won with Flag, like so. But that even more so puts them in the mix for a potential quarterback. So I'm putting them on the list. Steelers, yes, they're on the list. Yes, they traded for Fields. They didn't re-sign him. Yes, they traded for Ross. That cost them money. They're in the mix for sure. They're top competitor against the Giants in that regard. Houston, no shot with Stroud. Indianapolis, no shot with Richardson. In my mind, no shot. Trevor Lawrence, no shot there in Jacksonville. Titans are in the mix. I think they've given Levis such an insane amount of talent around him this year. They have Hopkins coming back. They added Ridley. They added Boyd. They added another offensive lineman in Latham. They had Callahan, a great coordinator. They added his dad, a great offensive line coach. But I think Levis is so bad at football personally that he could easily flame out despite all the talent around him. So, and I'm very anti-down on Levis. Always have been. Didn't like his tape at Kentucky at all with Wandell, and don't like what I saw last year. Though he did have a good first game. So I think they're in the mix. Then finally, the last division, no shot with Herbert, no shot with Chargers, no shot with the Chiefs. Raiders, obviously a top competitor versus the Giants there in that regard. And then who's the last team? Denver. They just drafted Bo Nix, so I would think they're going to give him at least another year. But you never know. But I would think that they're out of the mix.
Turning in his AARP card by next year.
Yeah, well, Penix is going to start his first game at 29 years old or 30 years old. It's going to be insane. So those are the teams that are in the mix, Sergio. And it's not as many as you'd think, and some of those teams are even optional or questionable at best. So it's a possibility. Okay, OG NES Gamer asks, who are your top two X factors on the Giants this year?
Love it.
This is a great question. One of mine is Offensive line coach, Brasillo. Illuminor spoke highly of him and how he improved his confidence. Pugh also speaks about confidence being a top important factor on the Giants. That's one of mine. What are your two each?
It bleeds right in because you bring up confidence. And I think one player on the New York Giants that has a dearth of confidence is Evan Neal, and he's one of the X factors. Evan Neal can just get to 75% of what Andrew Thomas was in Andrew Thomas's second season, so not even what Andrew Thomas is now, then the Giants are going to be in a much better spot. So Evan Neal, and then Brian Burns, maybe. I think you can go in any different direction. I'm not going to say the quarterback. That's an obvious one. Quarterback is an obvious X factor all the time. But if Brian Burns can add an edge rushing presence that the Giants have so desperately lacked since OCU Manure, like that type of edge bend type of player, that can just do so much for this Giants team when you have Dexter Lawrence on the interior rushing and pushing centers and guards back. So I'm going to go with Evan Neal and Brian Burns. You could take it in any direction and you would not be wrong.
Yeah, I'll say this as far as Brasillo goes, to the point of OG NES Gamer ask. I don't fully know the importance or impact of an offensive line coach. I've heard, things that don't lead me to believe it's definitely this big impact that I know a lot of fans assume. And, Bobby Johnson was so bad. And we've even said it ourselves on this podcast at times. So I'm not going to go that direction, but I will go with one of your two picks, Nick, and it's Evan Neal. To me, Evan Neal is such an X factor in this season. If Evan Neal can just find a way to stay healthy, I think that's a big factor, and get his confidence back. So I think part of what you said is true. Confidence to me is one of the biggest issues with Evan Neal, and he could play, like you said, Nick, a little bit closer to Thomas, or even just what we saw at Alabama, like not be this all-star elite lineman, but just somebody who doesn't, just gets the job done. It's going to make such a difference for this offense. And then the second one, I know it's obvious, but I am going with Daniel Jones, because it is, if I'm just answering two top X factors, to me, quarterback plays the biggest role on this team. And I know it's an easy one, it's an obvious one, but that's the one for me. Okay, Banks Closed asks, pretend they won't play Jones because of an injury guarantee this year. Would you roll with Locke and DeVito? Would you sign a vet instead of DeVito? What would make the most sense? Interesting.
What would make the most sense? I think I would roll with Locke and DeVito. And if you're not playing Daniel, I mean, they're never going to tank, but it'd probably be best if you rolled with Locke or DeVito. I don't know what veteran quarterback right now who's on the market would they bring in, especially after they brought in Nathan Rourke. And I know we're not putting a lot of eggs in the Nathan Rourke basket, but they did that for a reason. Might just be for a camp arm, but they were enticed by the CFL kid.
They were enticed by him. And, they also added the kid as an undrafted free agent. Forgetting his name. Do you remember the guy's name? They had the UDFA. They had to add it at quarterback.
No, I don't think he was a UDFA. I think he's a rookie mini camp tryout. Liam Thompson.
Liam Thompson. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, Nick, I will say this about Liam Thompson, because a listener asked me to watch his highlights. It's not tape. I haven't found any tape. I just watched his highlight video. I think this kid's got some arm talent. I'm not going to lie. Have you watched any Liam Thompson? Watch some of the throws he makes out of structure, and the arm angles he throws from. Obviously, arm talent is only one factor, and it's probably the one factor that led them there. But I'm somewhat intrigued by Liam Thompson as a developmental prospect. So personally, I would roll with Locke and DeVito and just go with the system guys. I think most of the free agents that have any upside at quarterback have been signed already. Okay, P. Combs asks, and I'm not positive if this is actually P. Combs or Nick who planted this question, but he says, Dan, how's your mini golf game? The reason I think this is a planted question is because I've played Nick in mini golf, and he did beat me by a considerable margin. Now, this was before I ever played golf. I want to make that clear before I picked up a club. I've now practiced a lot of putting, but somehow my putting is by far and away the worst part of my game, man. It's just a disaster. I can't figure it out. I hate putting. I hate every aspect of it. I hate reading the green. I don't have a good feel. I need to really lock in and practice my putting because it's killing my game, quite frankly, as far as scoring goes. So my mini golf game, probably not good. Somehow Nick's good at it, though, and then he's better than proven.
Well, thank you, Dan, and that was a lot of fun.
You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
Victor asks, you boys are great. Thank you, Victor. How did the Giants do in the draft compared with the other teams in the NFC East? Are we closing the gap? Please say yes. Best regards, Victor.
I think the true answer to this question, Victor, and thank you for the question and continued support, is we won't know for 3 years. That's how Nick and I feel about draft questions. I don't want to evaluate a class now, but I did like this Giants class, and I've said it. I think we graded it. I gave it an A-, and I think, Nick, you were either B+ or A-. I don't remember, but either way, B+. And so I'm a fan of this class. As far as narrowing the gap goes, again, I think we need a little bit more time there.
Yeah, and we actually did a whole episode if you want our opinions on the NFC East draft.
Yeah.
Rohan asks, food-related question. I am an almost vegan. Okay. If we were to go out to eat, where would we go in North Jersey? Beer question. Haven't lived in Jersey for a while, but any must-visit breweries in North Jersey? Thank you, Rowan.
Great questions. I may not be the most qualified to answer either of them. If we were to go out to eat as an almost vegan, I'm trying to think of a good place I eat that would be vegan. I mean, vegan is, it's no dairy either and no eggs, I think, so I can't do pizza. I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry, Rohan. I'm not very vegan friendly in my diet, unfortunately. Nick may have a better answer for that one. Nick, do you have anything on that regard?
No, I don't eat vegan, but I would just say go to Google, and this is what I do. I go to Google, I go to Yelp, I go to any of those reviews, and I just look up, see who has a lot of rankings and who has a high star, and then I go and
I apologize, Rohan.
I apologize too, man.
Yeah, it doesn't mean we wouldn't do it. I would go out and eat with any listener at any vegan restaurant. I'm sure I can find something good at a vegan restaurant. I do believe in that. I'm not anti-vegan in that regard, but beer question wise, I don't have any great must-visit breweries in New Jersey.
I feel so bad, man. We are so useless to either of these questions.
I used to be useful from a beer standpoint, but things have changed in that regard. So yeah, unfortunately, we got nothing for either one. MP asks, do you share my feelings that this year it's Joe Shane's team? He started in the hole. I agree with that, but now he's officially remade the roster in his way.
Yeah, I mean, you're 3 years into a rebuild at this point, or a takeover, if you want to phrase it that way. So yeah, this is Joe Shane's team. Doesn't mean that it's going to be as advanced as maybe other general managers who inherited a better situation, but he did inherit some foundational pieces that are now the face of the New York Giants franchise, and Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence. But yeah, at this point, this is Joe Schoen's team.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. We've seen the roster has been made over, and there's very few guys that are holdovers. And I think it's fair to say, and we'll get to this more in the next in another podcast, but that we need to see significant improvement out of a lot of Joe Schoen's guys, even if that doesn't mean the ceiling is now Super Bowl or a consistent division winner yet, because of the quarterback position and how poor that room is potentially. Hopefully it takes a jump. We don't know. I still think we need improvement out of his players, and it should lead to more wins as well in the 8, 9, 10, 11 range. I do think that is a bar that is fair to set despite the quarterback situation.
David Goodman asks, how would you compare the talent level of the roster now to when Joe Schoen took over? Are they just a quarterback away from being a good team, or are they further off than that?
I do feel, and we'll see if I'm wrong about this, but I do feel pretty confident that this roster has taken major steps. The wide receiver room, I feel like, is really talented, has a lot of speed and explosion. I think the offensive line is better than what it was when it took over. Again, that's more projection. I think the receiver one's more of a lock. That one's more projection. I don't care about the running back room being worse than when he took over, because I think a running game is dependent on the scheme, dependent on the blocking. I think that's what makes a run game. And then I think on the other side of the ball, tight end, I think is clearly better, but that again is a little projection based. Bellinger, I think, is there on film, but Theo's more of a projection. Defense, I like it better. I'll be honest with you. I think the build is better with a Brian Burns type and a Kayvon Thibodeau versus kind of all interior guys like Dave Gettleman had them. Corner, I don't think they're worse. I think Deonte Banks has a lot of upside there. Same thing goes for safety. Maybe you can say they're worse going from McKinney to Newbin, and I think that's fair. But I do think Pinnock adds something to that safety room as a safety too that maybe they didn't previously had. And then Bobby Okereke is easily the best linebacker that they've had on this roster, and way better than anything that they had with Dave Gettleman. So obviously he was like doing the Ogletree thing and the Jalen Smith thing. Jalen Smith was
the Ogletree thing. Oh my God, I remember that.
He traded for Ogletree and then restructured and re-signed his contract, pushing back cap it. That's what Dave did. Now they have Okereke instead. So I think our roster is clearly better. I think this roster was already ready to compete if they had hit on a CJ Stroud. I think now that you have Nabers in the mix and Theo Johnson in the mix and Tyrone Tracy, they're undoubtedly in position to compete for Super Bowls if they can hit that quarterback.
Which is a huge if.
Yes.
Thank you, David. Zach asks, do you guys think we will add another edge to the room before the season begins? It doesn't make sense to me having our three starting edges weigh 249, 249, and 254 from a matchup standpoint. Does someone like Emmanuel Ugba, who is a free agent, or Danico Autry, who had experience under Bowen, fit the mold? Autry is now with the Houston Texans, but Ugba is definitely a name to monitor, and I think Zach is definitely onto something. At this point, I think the Giants should add a bigger edge rusher who can be kicked inside if you want to, a la Jihad Ward with, I don't know, maybe some pass rushing moves.
Completely agree with you, Nick. I think they should, and they will. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. That's where I think the rest of this cap space is going just before camp. Shane has been very active in his seasons with the Giants, signing players in camp or just before September during cuts, things of that nature. That's where I think we're going to go with it. I think that's the number one priority for them right now. So I think you nailed this one, Zach. All right, Christopher Peace asks, what is the direction of this team? What are its strengths? Where are they better compared to 3 years ago? Why does the fan base have to be patient going into year 3 of this regime? I look forward to the pod.
Yeah, Chris, we've talked about some of this throughout this podcast and throughout this offseason. I would say that you have to be patient because the Giants completely retooled their path after the 2022 season where they unlikely won a playoff game. So they decided to invest in somebody that they declined their 5th-year option on the previous year. So I think we needed to adjust our expectations and try to trust the process of them adjusting their own initial process that they believed they were going to execute. But obviously they won football games and they were going to run with it at the time. What are the strengths of this team? I would say left tackle and defensive line. I think right now, if we have to think more broadly, it'd be pass rush. I think pass rush could be a big strength of this team with Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and Kayvon Thibodeau. And I know Dan and I thought that last year as well. Right. And I think they were put into a position where they weren't allowed to pin their ears back because the offense was terrible. The offense really hampered the pass rush's ability. And now you add a player who is arguably a better pass rusher than anybody on this roster, not named Dexter Lawrence. I would even say arguably with Dexter Lawrence, because he's definitely the best pass rusher without Dexter Lawrence. He's much better pass rusher than a player like Kayvon Thibodeau or Azeez Ojulari. So if I had to pick one asset part of this team, I want to go with the pass rush as the best strength. Where are you at, Dan?
definitely the best strength. I would agree with that. I think there's other strengths. I think the wide receiver, the skill positions are a strength now. And I think anyone who argues with that is just, I'm going to say, in my opinion, it's still an opinion, but I think in my opinion, they're wrong because I've seen the tape of Hyatt and I've seen the tape of Wando. And obviously we know what Nabers tape looks like. That is a good room right now. Then you add Theo Johnson, Bellinger types, Tyrone Tracy to the backfield and potentially out wide. That's talent at the skill position. So I'm going to say that's a strength of the roster at this point as well. I think inside linebacker, strength of the roster, because that's how good Bobby Okereke was. We forget how that stretch he had in the middle of the season where I thought he was one of the best linebackers in the entire NFL. And sometimes all it takes is one linebacker to make that room a strength. So I'm going to say that one as well. As far as the patience thing goes, I think that's more of like a narrative at this point. You got to have patience, and people are so angry about that. You don't have to have patience. I said it in the last question, and I agree, Chris. They have to make big strides next year outside of quarterback position. That means Neal types have to get better. Thibodeau types have to get better. You got to get something out of Cordell Flott. You got to get something potentially out of an Azudu or one of these day 3 picks. So I think it's fair to not be patient outside of the quarterback position. But as far as if you think they should have a Super Bowl ceiling already, and if you don't, you're saying that's providing too much patience. I just think it's unrealistic expectations. How many teams have a Super Bowl ceiling going into 2024? How many teams have an option to get a Super Bowl type quarterback on their roster that gives you that ceiling? Not many. So I just think it's unfair, personally, to the reality of the situation.
All right. So Jerry Diglio asks, I think I nailed that. And this is kind of a redundant question, but I wanted to try the Italian last name because I was called out before, so I felt it necessary. Have the Giants closed any gaps with the rest of the division, or did they fall behind? Dan and I did an NFC East breakdown where we covered a lot of their draft. I wouldn't say they closed the gap per se on the Eagles. If we're looking at them, I think Washington took some big steps forward, and I'm a little bit scared of Adam Peters as their as the guy running the show there. With Dallas, I have no idea what's going on with the Cowboys. I think they probably took a step back. So you could say the Giants closed the gap, because I think the Giants did take some steps forward with the Dallas Cowboys, but Washington is right on their heels, if not have passed the New York Giants. And then I still think the Eagles are probably at the top of the division.
I think you're right about that one, Nick, and I think you nailed that one. Okay, Lord Whoophat asks, will Drew Lock be given a legitimate shot to compete for the starting job, and will Brian Daboll have the stones to name him the starter if he outplays Jones?
I think he would have the stones to do that, Lord Whoophat. Thank you so much for the question. I think it's because we've seen him do that in the past, as Dan mentioned, with the Kenny Golladay situation, and contractually, it makes sense. I think the front office will never admit this, and will never say it publicly, but I think they know that they can't really take that risk with Daniel Jones and the contract. If you have another option there who is also playing well, that the fan base can rally around, it's really just convincing the fan base to, like, yes, we have Drew Lock here. Let's get him going. But then it's also, you got to communicate with ownership. Like, I know we have all this money tied up in Daniel Jones, but here are all the facts right now. It's a little bit of a complex situation, but to answer the question broadly, yes.
Yeah, we've covered that a lot. I'm going to move to the next one. Joshua Stern asks, how do you feel about Tyrone Tracy versus Estime?
I like Aldrick Estime better than Tyrone Tracy. I think they're different players, though. I think Tyrone is a little bit more shifty in a phone booth than an Aldrick Estime, although I think Aldrick Estime with his size is shiftier than he's probably given credit for. And I think Aldrick Estime also has better breakaway speed than he's given credit for, but probably not to the level of a Tyrone Tracy.
Yeah, I think you hit that right. I think Tracy can add a different element, but I have Estime. We both had Estime higher. The Giants didn't have an opportunity to Estime, though. He wasn't on the board when Tracy was picked, and maybe you could say they should have traded up, but that's a conversation for another day. Michael Bursick asked, what was your inspiration for iCarly? That question is just going to bring up anger for me because I hate that Dan Schneider dude. And remember, it's Schneider, not Schneider. Recently I was playing golf, Nick, and Schneider, it's your round. No, it's not Schneider. Okay, I want to make it clear. Everybody sees the last name, they think it's Schneider because there's very few Schneiders in the world. I am Schneider, and there are bad people named Dan Schneider. There's one bad guy. I don't want to be associated with that POS at all. Though, again, I don't also want to comment on that because I don't really know the situation. I didn't watch that documentary, but anyway.
Like a divorced wife, you drop the D. All right, let's move on.
No, you know what the real joke is that I hope doesn't offend anyone because it's a joke. We're allowed to make jokes in life. God, this could offend people. This really shouldn't offend people. And if you're offended by this, look at Nick's face. He's like, where is this going? This could be dangerous. Maybe we need to edit this out post-pod. I don't know. But the real joke is, Nick, it was Schneider. And when my family came over from Ellis Island, they were too cheap, so they dropped the D.
Nah, man, that's a funny joke, dude.
It's a good joke, but some people might get offended by that. I don't know. I hope not.
I think
It's a fine joke. I think it's fine. The real question, he says, is I never had the luxury of the Big Blue Banter film reviews in 2007 to 2011. Oh, I wish we had it. Again, I'm going to make this point again to anybody who might have access. Please, 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 if you can find a way to get us game film from any of the 2007 through 2011 or 2007 or 2011 playoff run, find a way, DM it to me and Nick. I would love more than anything this summer during the dead time before training camp to spend time. Like, we can do the podcast where we're breaking down breakouts, sleepers, busts. It's all fun, but nothing would be more fun than to do a game film review with you, Nick, on one of those playoff games. Nothing. There's nothing better. I think it would do better numbers. I think it would be the best content we can provide, and it would also be the most fun to actually do. So I don't know how we get access to that game film, and I don't know why it's so protected by the NFL. Somebody find us those games. And I would just love to see so many reasons, just to see how different the NFL is, man. Like how the formations, everything would be so different. The game was played so differently. It was a different era of football. Gilbride's offense, Spags' defense. Like there's just so much to that. So your question, though, can be answered, which is how would you scout Eli's pros and cons during his prime? Because I think we can do that anyway. And would his game translate to today's NFL? Great questions.
Yeah, he would definitely translate to today's NFL. Quarterback, somebody who's not going to be moving as much. We've seen the NFL shift towards more fluid movers. That's not necessarily Eli Manning's game, but Eli Manning was very good in the pocket. So he could maneuver a pocket very well, very intelligent at the line of scrimmage. He could make all the checks, all the calls, make sure everybody is where they need to be to pick up the blitzes and where all the wide receivers understand the coverage and where to go. Now, a lot of that was also on the wide receivers, which resulted in a lot of interceptions from Eli Manning's standpoint, but Eli Manning had actual arm talent. Like real arm talent.
Yeah.
Like he can layer footballs over linebackers, between safeties, not get his wide receivers absolutely killed. He's a little bit reckless at times, but I will take a reckless Andrew Luck type of quarterback any day of the week over a reluctant quarterback who is not going to challenge the tight windows. Eli Manning challenged tight windows. So to be brief, Eli Manning would thrive in today's NFL as well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Nick. Some of the pros and cons that I would say and how they would translate to his game. One pro would be just that elite level mastery before the snap, the pre-snap period, getting your protection set, getting your running back to understand where to be in protection, getting your receivers. And this was a big part of what they relied on Gilbride's offense, which is why he threw so many interceptions, but then at times it looked like he couldn't be stopped because they ran so many option routes where the quarterback had to be on the same page as the wide receiver based on the coverage. And he's making those checks at the pre-snap. And I've talked about this before on the pod, Nick, but on my Samsung TV, the default channel is the SEC network for some reason. I just love having that as my default channel. Like before I get into YouTube TV or whatever, I don't have cable. I use YouTube TV. And so I see a lot of these old Eli Manning games from Ole Miss. And dude, he was doing stuff at that line of scrimmage pre-snap at Ole Miss. That just shows what kind of processing he has. So I would say his pre-snap mastery was unbelievable. His pocket manipulation, man. Watch the San Francisco 49ers playoff game in 2011 and how he manipulated that pocket under heavy duress the entire game. Those are two of the elite traits. The velocity that he put on his throws, not the same level as the quarterback the Giants have had since or at any point since, and not the same level. He's probably would have been top 5 in velocity. The ability to layer the football, Nick discussed as well. There were some aggressive moments to Eli's game from a con standpoint where he threw interceptions and threw into windows he probably shouldn't have. He obviously didn't have any athleticism and ability to create outside of structure. That's another con to his game for sure. I would say those are the two biggest cons, Nick. But you could still win in the NFL with this type of quarterback. We see it. Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow is obviously more athletic than Eli, but he doesn't really get out of structure and do a lot. He does a lot of manipulating within the pocket. That's what Eli used to do. So now Joe Burrow does things better than Eli. Throw with anticipation, I thought was better, but he doesn't have the same kind of velocity. And so I still think that quarterback can win the NFL.
What do we got next? We have Vinny Gaz or Jazz or however we say this. Gaz probably makes more sense. Wings defense had its flaws, and thank you for the question, but it was usually pretty good and exciting. Adding Burns, but losing McKinney and Adoree, how do we feel about Bowen's defense in comparison?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be as fun to watch on tape and as fun to break down or as exciting, but I think it might be more effective. And I do really believe that because I want that defense that dictates, obviously, like Wink would do, but I look at that, Nick, and I wonder the ceiling of that. The ceiling of that to me is you build out that Ravens roster he was able to build out with 3 good corners, and those 3 good corners have to stay healthy all year. And it's a position that gets injured a lot, corner. And if those corners don't stay healthy, you're in trouble with that defense against the good processing quarterbacks. And we saw throughout Wink's tenure with the Giants, when he faced a really fast processing quarterback, he got ate up a lot. And he got chewed up a lot. I think Bowen's defense and his style is more along the lines of what most coordinators are doing, for the reason being that it can provide you a solution against the fast processing quarterbacks. It's not always going to work, but it gives you a chance against those guys. And it makes it less reliant on the corners staying healthy and more reliant on that front 4 making an impact in every game.
All right. So the next question from James White: stat projections for Drew Lock if he starts the whole season. Thank you, James.
I will defer to you, Nick. You're a stat projection guy.
All right. Yeah. The stat projections are dumb, but they're kind of fun at the same time.
Fun.
Let's go with start 17 games. Drew Lock will throw for 3,700 yards, 22 touchdowns, 12 interceptions.
I don't think that's unfair. Especially, I'll start with the yardage thing. I looked at it last year. Drew Lock averaged a good amount of yards in his games played with the Seahawks last year. I was surprised to see, including he threw for I believe almost 250 against the Niners. Tough defense last year in that start, which was a tough spot for him. So I think the yardage would go up. 22 touchdowns is low, but then again, the Giants haven't really thrown for that many touchdowns. I would love to know the number.
You know what? Yeah, I think I would probably uptick that a little bit more.
Okay.
I'd probably go to 27 or something.
Okay.
So you got to think, man, there's going to be a lot more probably passing touchdowns with Saquon no longer there too.
Right, exactly. And then he's not a zone read threat in the red zone either. So he's not running for any touchdowns that are going to be taken away by that. So it's just going to be, you're right, more passing touchdowns. But maybe the interceptions go up from 12 at that point. He's late on some throws. But that's probably a good range for what we would expect if he did start the whole season. Okay, Evan Brown says, Dan and Nick, I love the draft content, and I've been listening to the show at work. Which position group do you think the Giants have most improved this offseason? Which group do you still have concerns about? And which group do you think will surprise a lot of people? That's a great question, too.
Yeah, so the most improved, is it edge rusher just from the addition of Brian Burns?
It's either edge rusher or receiver from the addition of Nabers.
Yeah.
I don't know
there was no huge loss at either. And I still have kind of concerns about the edge room. I just think I'm going to go with wide receiver for that. I think the Nabers addition, I think that's a good point. Which group do you guys still have concerns about? I have concerns about the secondary. I have concerns about the cornerback position. And which group do you think will surprise a lot of people? I think the offensive line could surprise a lot of people.
I think those are great answers. I think
it's because the bar is so low too for the offensive line. So even to be mediocre would be a step in the right direction.
I'm going to say the other group real quick. Let's go rapid fire on some of these because we're low on time. I want to get as many questions as we can. But the other group that could surprise people for me is secondary. I think there could be less reliance on it with this scheme, and the D line can make them look better than maybe people expect. Okay, Frank Corona. I know we don't believe we tried to trade up for Alt, but if both Alt and Nabers were there at 6, who do you think they would have picked?
Nabers.
I'm going to say Nabers as well. If you had the choice of putting prime Tiki Barber, prime Shockey, or prime Plax on this team for the next 4 years, who would you pick? Great question as well.
Oh, that is an excellent question. I think, I'm not, this one might take a little bit. I think I would go with prime Shockey, maybe. I don't know though.
I'm locked in on prime Plax for me.
Yeah, I think I might go with Plax just because of personality. It depends.
If I could get Shockey to be a mute for the rest of his life, no offense, I don't want that to happen to you. Never mind. That sounds so awful. Mute, it's fine. If you could get him to sew his mouth shut for every game, I would pick Shockey. But just thinking about Shockey's antics with Eli, dude, can you imagine if he didn't have if he had a quarterback worse than Eli and how much he would hate and yell at that quarterback and kill his confidence? So to me, it's Plax without a doubt.
I think that's a really good call. Nathan asks, I feel better about their offensive skill players post-draft than I did pre-draft, not just because of the Nabers pick. What would your expectations be for the offense this year, regardless of the quarterback situation? Do you feel better about the explosive play percentage going up along with their points per game?
Yes, and yes. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think that we could get to a point if the O-line takes the necessary step where the quarterback is negated to an extent and able to make plays despite his limitations, whoever that quarterback might be. LL Cool John says, can we go higher, like a 40,000 foot view? No, LL Cool John. We cut off at 30,000 feet. And unfortunately, to the dismay of Creed, we cannot go any higher. No.
Stefan Weiss asks, how do you think the wide receiver rotation will look if they keep Slayton? Objectively, he's the third second or third best wide receiver on the roster right now, but the Giants probably want to give Hyatt and Robinson more playing time. Also, do you have a favorite club you use to chip around the green?
Oh, nice. Okay. You're going to love that second question, Nick. I am not as convinced that Slayton is the second or third best receiver, but again, it's mostly projection based, and I have higher projections for Hyatt and Wan'Dale based on the tape. But if they do keep him, I think the rotation will probably it'll be Slayton. I think, honestly, Wan'Dale could lose the most time if they keep Slayton there. That's where maybe I would guess there, or Hyatt. It's hard to say. One of those two.
I don't think that's inaccurate. I think Wan'Dale might get some run at running back in like split formations, and
Sure.
You might see him align in some more creative spots to allow Nabers to also play in the slot and to add maybe another dimension to this offense. And as for the favorite club, what do you got there?
Chipping is something you need to practice. Chipping and putting is something you need to practice. I had been using a 9 or a 7 around the green to just bump and run. But lately, I've changed my chipping form, and I've been chipped. So I basically use the 56 for everything from 100 in, or not 100, about 85 in. I like to use my 56. I feel good with it. But then when I got close, I would just bump and run with a 9 or 7. But lately, I've been practicing a little bit more with the chipping around the green. So I've been chipping with my 56, and I've had some good results. I had a chip in my last round where I chipped it so close to the hole that I didn't even have to putt it, which is always a good feeling.
Okay, Austin Wang Bailey asks, given that we obviously pass on a quarterback this draft cycle, where do you foresee the Giants finding DJ's inevitable replacement? We answered this a little bit earlier, Austin, but I wanted to tackle your second question. Also, who are your respective MLB, NHL, NBA, and Premier League teams?
I got Mets, Devils, Giants, and I haven't gotten into the Premier League. What about you, Nick?
No Premier League team for me. I have big Rangers fan, big Knicks fan. Baseball, I support both the Yankees and the Mets.
Did you watch last night? That I watch playoff hockey almost exclusively. I don't really watch regular season. I watched that entire Rangers game. That was a phenomenal game. I assume you watched.
Oh yeah, of course.
Oh my God, what an ending that was. That was such a fun game. The goalie they have is just unbelievable.
Shesterkin's standing on his head right now. And he's talking about game 2 of the series for those listening. So probably going to drop this on Saturday.
Oh yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen before. I think they actually play Saturday. So, but yeah, no, Igor's been playing out of his mind in the playoffs, really stepping it up. And all the pieces on the New York Rangers who have sucked in the playoffs in the past years are actually playing really well. So it's an exciting time to be a Rangers fan. And I freaking love the New York Rangers, baby.
Billy Pilgrim asked, Giants fans are understandably frustrated. It looks like we'll be running it back with DJ. Is the smoke around DJ and Locke having a real battle? Who do you think will win that battle if it was a real battle? And if it is Locke, what we could expect from him? We've kind of answered this one, but we didn't really answer who do you think would win that battle, Nick? What do you think about that?
I think DJ offers more because of the speed, but I would not be surprised to think Drew Locke could win that battle in the right situation. And I think Drew Locke and DJ are at least comparable. It's not like DJ's discernibly different or better than Drew Locke. He offers maybe a little bit more because of that athletic ability, but I can see Drew Locke winning that too.
Yeah, I would say DJ would win that battle because he has experience within the system and he knows the system. NYG and ND ask, with DJ uncertain to be healthy for the start of camp, if Locke takes all the reps and does Dable stay with a hot hand? We've answered this one already. Let's move to the next one. M23 asks, give us your predictions of the opening week starting quarterback. I think it's going to be Jones. What about you?
I'm going to say Jones, but anything can happen.
Okay, Matthew Lamagna asks, if Jones was tagged in 2023 offseason instead of Barkley and presumably not brought back this offseason, and the Giants were still picking at 6 and couldn't trade up, do you think they would have made a strong play for Kirk Cousins? Interesting.
I think they could have. Yeah, I think it would have certainly been considered. I think they would have been much more active on the trade market, or they would have, I don't know, man. I don't know about the trading. You wouldn't have been able to trade up. You wouldn't have been able to trade up. So there could have been a lot of other different things that would have happened as well with that situation. The Giants might have lost some more games if they didn't have Saquon Barkley on the team, if they never came to a deal with him. So that butterfly effect could have had a bigger, broader effect as well.
Yeah, they might have been in position, but he said if they were still picking 6, let's operate under that. I think they would have potentially picked, signed Kirk Cousins, honestly. I really do believe that. Now, then again, Atlanta was hot on the market for him, and he would have had to make the decision which situation he feels is better. Giants probably would have sold to him, we're going to take one of these elite receivers at 6, but Atlanta sells probably a little stronger. You not only have the receivers already in place, but more importantly, you have a competence on the offensive line there, and you're playing in a dome, which has helped Cousins' career, in my opinion, playing in a dome. So I think Atlanta might have won that battle. Dan Orlando asks, Can you guys discuss what this year's Giants offense would look like if Tommy DeVito was the starter for the full season? Is there any reason to believe he could develop into something that Jones and Locke aren't? Interesting.
It is an interesting question. I think they would run a lot of the similar sale type of concepts. And he was keeping the offense in rhythm, and he was hitting his back foot, firing the football. I don't think the arm talent's all that great. So I think the ceiling is a little bit limited from that perspective, but I think he's a great asset on a football team because he's an undrafted kid who's getting paid peanuts, who has proven that he can come in and be competent enough to not shit all over himself.
Yeah, and then there were moments where he hit hole shots last year that were interesting.
Oh yeah,
the throw he made against Wandell to win the Packers game had a lot of good anticipation on it. Had some velocity on the short intermediate throws. Still question the deep arm, but there is reason to believe he could be something different than Locke and Jones because every quarterback is going to process the offense a little bit differently, as we saw with Vito last year and as we saw with Tyrod last year.
We've heard Shane, or no, it wasn't Shane, maybe it was Dable, praise Tommy DeVito's recollection ability, which is something that Derek Carr has made a career off of. And I'm not disparaging Derek Carr, but we know Derek Carr has a photographic memory, similar to like a Sean McVay. Tommy DeVito reportedly has that as well. And I think that can go a long way and help overcome some of the more limited arm talent concerns. And it's not like he doesn't have an NFL arm either. Like he does have an NFL arm. It's just on the lower end of the spectrum of NFL arms.
I think he also praised, I remember him praising that, the recollection ability and how he processes. I also naturally, I should say, Dable, how he processes naturally DeVito, but I think he praised something else, like his quiet feet. I think it was. I felt like he had quiet feet in the pocket. I'm not certain if that was the case. It was something to do with his pocket manipulation.
It was that, and it was also just understanding where he went wrong. Like he was like every time he made a mistake, like he knew it. He could articulate, and I think a big point of emphasis that Brian Dable made on why he really loved Tommy DeVito was how he could articulate what he was seeing. Was what he said. He can really describe to the coaching staff what he's seeing and how that impacts what the offense is trying to do, which I guess is not something that every quarterback can do.
Jamal Hashbrown asks, great job on the pod. I think it's the best Giants podcast. How many running backs do you think the Giants carry this year? I'm intrigued by the Dante Miller signing. Also, who should fill the other D tackle spot next to Dex?
I think the D tackle question goes to Raheem Nunez-Roches right now if they don't add another player. But if Jordan Riley and DJ Davidson take big steps forward, then I think they should definitely take over that spot from Raheem Nunez-Roches. And as for the running backs, if you include Tracy as a running back, I can see them keeping 4. But I can also see them keeping 3. But I think it's going to be more of a committee approach, which makes me lean towards 4.
I am also somewhat intrigued by the Dante Miller signing. I think he's got a level of potential athleticism that could work. We'll see. I will say this about D tackle, Nick. I'm cautiously optimistic and cautiously overly optimistic, I should say, about Jordan Phillips. Because I just feel like if you have Dexter Lawrence and Jordan Phillips in the middle of that defensive line, what is that right there? Is that 700 pounds?
How much does Jordan Phillips weigh?
Jordan Phillips, I think, is like 360.
He's that big.
No, maybe not. I might have made that.
I knew he was a big guy. I think
Jordan Phillips weight. This is a great podcast, but we're gonna have to do it real quick. No, 342. Okay.
Yeah.
You still have almost 700 pounds of meat right there. Oh man, I can't believe I said that word. Almost 700 pounds. That's ridiculous. Almost 700 pounds right there in the middle of your defense. So, I mean, look, I'm intrigued by what that can do for the system, what that can do for the 2 guys around them, whoever those edges are on any given play. I like the concept of having a Jordan Phillips and Dexter Lawrence in the middle of your defense for the run game and for the pass game. So that's who I'm most intrigued by. Potentially on the roster, he's one of the most intriguing guys for me. Knees Bees asks, do you think there's any chance that Illuminor or Locke can beat out their respective counterparts for week 1?
I think Locke can. Illuminor for right tackle, I think it's possible, but probably unlikely.
I'm going to say Locke, 25% chance. Illuminor, 2% chance.
Okay, I'm going to say Locke. Yeah, I think 25% chance is fair. And then Illuminor, 5% chance.
Okay. Nick Herbert, assuming pieces are brought in through draft and free agency, what are the key improvements we need to see out of Daniel Jones to get results next season?
No, it's the same thing. Just can't be as reluctant as he's been. You need to anticipate a little bit better, see the defense in a more clear manner, and then actually attack the defense.
I hope Jones just says F it, man, and just take shots this year. And just, Jalen Hyatt's one-on-one, just freaking throw the ball up there, throw the post, just do something different, man. Take a shot. What do you care at this point? What do you have to lose? Dable comes back to the huddle. Dable's pissed at you. Whatever. You took a shot and maybe it worked. Then he's not going to be mad. Uncle Jesse asks, Nick, rye or bourbon, Dan, tequila or mezcal? What's your answer to that one?
Bourbon.
I would say mezcal if I'm going straight up, but I do like a tequila soda.
Also, Uncle Jesse asks, how many games until we see Neighbors pissed on the sideline for not getting the ball?
I hope he doesn't get that way.
Same.
A lot of people expect that to happen because of what happened with Odell Beckham Jr. and because of a lot of the other diva receivers around the NFL. But I don't think it's fair to just assume Neighbors is going to be one of them. You watch a lot of his tape at LSU. And I'm not trying to say like this is an easy thing to predict at the next level, but I didn't feel like I was watching one of the diva type receivers. He wasn't a guy who just got up and showboated to the corner, or like went nuts with touchdown celebrations, or like, I mean, you don't see sideline stuff, so I don't know how that would go, but
Yes.
I just don't get the full feel he's going to be a diva.
It's difficult to opine on that. Giuseppe Chimino asks, aside from Neighbors, which of our new draft picks are you most excited and intrigued to see in OTAs preseason, and why?
Tyrone Tracy for me. I'll just go there to start. I just think there's room to grow. He's just learning the position, and his explosiveness, his stop and start ability. I'm just very excited about Tyrone Tracy.
I'm excited about them all. I'm going to go with Tyler Newman. So I think Tyler Newman has a huge role ahead of him if he can prove that he is worthy to hold the mantle and fill the shoes of Xavier McKinney. You talk about a new face of the franchise on the back end of the secondary. The Giants have continuously replaced at the safety position for a little bit now.
Joshua Stern, how does Neighbors compare to Odell Beckham Jr. as a prospect?
Ooh, that's interesting. So I think Odell was a little bit better at the catch point. I think they're both equally as explosive. Maybe Odell slightly more. But I would say the big difference is Odell Beckham was better at the catch point than Malik Nabers.
To me, the big difference would be Odell Beckham was a more complete route runner coming out of college. That was one thing I had him as my wide receiver 1 in that class, which is why I was so excited when we drafted him, had that argument with my dad. But I felt like he ran such a full route tree and he was so good at running every route. I'm not saying Neighbors isn't that way, but I just think in like release package off the line of scrimmage, there were just nuances to his game as a receiver that were more advanced. So that would be, but I also think there's parts of Neighbors' game that are better than Beckham. I think Neighbors is a much stronger prospect than Beckham was coming out. I think he's got better contact balance and better after contact than Beckham. Maybe not better after the catch, but better after contact.
Agreed. Mike asks, thanks for the awesome draft coverage. Loved all the analysis and guests you brought in. Thank you, Mike. If the Lions lock up Goff to a long-term deal, would you trade a 3rd-round pick for Hendon Hooker? I believe he was 68th last year. I know the Giants did their homework on him. Yeah, Mike, we brought this up about, 3 weeks ago? I think it was right before the draft. If they didn't go quarterback, Hendon Hooker could be an option, or maybe it was after the draft. But absolutely, I think that's an option, and it's an option I would definitely get behind.
All right, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for. We tried to do a little rapid fire to get a lot in, but there are some questions we didn't get to. We'll try to figure out a way to answer them on coming podcasts, maybe at the end of the show or something like that. Thank you to everyone who participated in Mailbags parts 1, 2, and 3, and/or 3. A lot of great questions. Mailbags are always a lot of fun. One of my favorite shows to do. And remember, if somebody can get us film from those 07 or 11 runs, I want to break those down this summer. So please find the film, send it to us. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you soon. Go Giants.